Thanks very much, Richard. Look, there's a lot to it, isn't there? And that's the second presentation I've heard Richard give, and there's always a lot to take away from it. Now, Andrew Genter is from Norman Disney Young, who you probably now know as NDY. It seems you can't be a consultant in Brisbane anymore without a three-letter acronym. So here we are. So here's Andrew Genter on sustainability in high-rise buildings, or in tall buildings. Thank you.
We'll just do the technology.
Hammer tune or something?
Hammer tune.
Ah, it's that one.
Thank you, Craig. IT support. Look, this is a little bit of a change of pace from where you've been, obviously, with the previous presentation. So what I'm going to give you is a really quick overview of sustainability, where definitions of what sustainability is and how it's defined, agreements and legislations that everyone should be aware of, some of the code requirements, rating tools that are available. There's hundreds of tools, hundreds of different stars, so there's a plethora of different ways of doing green things. The Property Code of the Property Council of Australia, how it deals with it, so what that means for office buildings and commercial buildings, and then just a few examples to finish off with. So sustainability, there's lots of different definitions of sustainability, but we'll start with this one because this is one that came out of the United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development. So sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Basically, at the moment, we're consuming things far more than, you would have seen the little pictures of the world. So, we're consuming 3 worlds and we've got 1 world. So where sustainability comes from, it's living within our means and not destroying the planet for future generations. The 3 pillars, this is always a good one. I've also got glasses that show this, but it's the social, the environmental and the economic. So it's about looking at all 3 in relation to buildings, and the built environment plays a big part in the whole consumption and sustainability going forward. So you would have seen Paris Agreement. So yes, the 2-degree world. So the most immediate climate change related items relate to obviously global warming, and the 2-degree, the Paris Agreement is about limiting global warming to 2 degrees and heading towards a zero net carbon economy by 2050. So there's a number of challenges in that because obviously buildings consume an enormous amount of the energy and materials through their nature and what they are. I mean, the climate change is leading to things such as, greater storms, higher winds, floods, droughts, all the things that are impacting the designs of buildings. So questions, I suppose, for going forward and lives of buildings at 50 years is what should the design parameters be? Because forces and winds are changing, and as has been mentioned earlier, standards may not necessarily hold the key. So what are we signed up to? We've signed up to strive for a 2-degree temperature rise. So develop decarbonisation strategies, reach net zero emissions by 2050, upgrade national emissions reduction targets every 5 years, and commit to transparent reporting. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a big step forward. So what is global warming? Most people, the definitions are great, but think of a greenhouse. So basically what's happening is that we have a layer of greenhouse gases that are just keeping the heat in, so heat's not escaping. So the impact of that is that we're warming. So, and the gases that are doing that are obviously the greenhouse gases, so carbon dioxide, CFCs and other pollutants. So that's where this comes from. So the joys, Australia, when you go to the top 15 world polluters, we make the list, which isn't a good thing to be on, but we're up there, so there's a lot that we can do locally. So, consumption. So as you can see, dark blue is bad in this case. So yeah, we're one of the world's worst emitters. So things need to change, and we need to look at how we do things differently going forward. So going back to buildings, we generate, or the building industry is around 40% of the world's emissions. So we're an enormous percentage of where all these gases come from. So that's not just in the running, so it's running, construction, the demolition, all the entire life cycle of a building. So it's not just about the energy that we save when the building's built, it's the whole life cycle is what this is looking at. I don't think, and I won't click this to pay, but this is just showing the temperature rise since 1850 and how the temperature has risen significantly over that period of time and is continuing to grow at a much faster rate than it has historically. So Australia, us again, 40 buildings use 42% of the energy, 12% of the water, 40% of air emissions, 40% of the waste to landfill. We get sick building syndrome. So we're not, as an industry, we've got a lot that we can do to help. Things that are happening. So in May, the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council launched a low carbon high performance report. So this is more about obviously looking at energy, reducing our carbon emissions. So this was developed in conjunction with ClimateWorks. So the report finds Australian built environment sector can reach zero carbon by 2050, delivering healthier, more productive cities and save $20 billion using technologies that exist today. So a lot of the stuff we can do already exists. It's just, I suppose, being smarter in the way we do things. So this report had 4 pillars, for want of a better analogy. So looking deep energy retrofits, low carbon electricity, fuel switching, and carbon forestry offsets. So greening, as we've heard before. I mean, yeah, so I suppose from a building point of view is quite apt. So the designs need to be appropriate for the climate, and now also I suppose for climate change. So it's an interesting cartoon. So, energy in the Building Code of Australia. So the National Construction Code now picks up a thing called Section J. Not so interesting to structural engineers and civil engineers because there's not a lot in Section J apart from building efficiency in the envelope. So things that will impact the facade performance, insulation, not having skylights everywhere. But basically, the building code's divided Australia into climate zones, which are represented by the colours on the map. And depending on where you live, gives you different prescriptive requirements or different performance requirements. So Section J picks up all these lovely bits and pieces. It gives you, as fire engineering, as a lot of you will be aware of with materials, you can energy engineer buildings now. So the energy engineering can give you if you don't like what you're getting out of the deemed to satisfy, you can resort to a performance solution and get to an answer. But basically when you look at the parts of it, obviously building fabric, external glazing, building ceiling are high up there, and then the building services fall to the bottom, being the air conditioning, lighting and power, heating, and down to facilities for energy monitoring, because part of it is from a services point of view, and going forward is actually just being able to understand where the power is being used and to track if things are going off the rails, so, or even where water's being used. So one of the big things is also water usage. So if you've had a leaking tap and it's been leaking since you started metering and you don't know that, then your baseline's offset and you don't know what you don't know. So there's some very interesting cases around, and when we had our drought and we were all on water restrictions, you couldn't wash your car and all the things, the world didn't end. We all survived, and we went from being the highest water user per capita to one of the world's lowest water users per capita, or Western world, and now we're creeping back up because the government has taken away that incentive, and we're being told to use more water. So there's some interesting challenges there that to pay for all the water infrastructure, we've got to use more water, which is not necessarily the right way to go. Now, stars. There's lots of different stars out there, and you've probably all seen some of these tools. You know, we've got, you know, Green Star is, I suppose, the leading Australian one, but BREEAM, you know, so that's the building research, and I'll read it properly, Establishment Environmental Assessment Method. So that's the European version. The LEED, the North American one, so that's primarily the US. Neighbours, which is our, again, Australian, but it's, for want of a better term, it started with energy, but it's now extended through to water waste and other things, which I'll touch on later. There's a number of other tools, like One Planet Living, so it's looking to calculate an ecological footprint, so looking at more whole-of-life things. Living Building Challenge, so that's a sustainable international sustainability program. So all these programs are looking at different things. So not one tool at the moment, you could say, does everything, but they're all out there trying to promote different parts of sustainability. So, buildings in Australia. So the Property Council of Australia, in their wisdom, have actually rolled green bits into commercial building standards. So what that means is that there's targets in there for Green Star, so being our, I suppose, the primary environmental tool we have, and Neighbours for both new and existing buildings. So you won't do a commercial office building now that these don't come up, because everyone's obviously after a grade. You won't do a refurbished building. So this is just as important, obviously, in re-lifing and getting old buildings to be commercially viable in the current market. So Green Star. Green Star has a number of different objectives, but basically what they're trying to do is reduce the impact of climate change, you know, enhance the health and quality of life of occupants, restore and protect the planet's biodiversity, ensure ongoing optimisation and operation and performance, and contribute to market transformation so that we're heading towards a sustainable economy. So anyone in the room who's used Green Star, you'll know that there's trade-offs in there that, you know, you'll get a point here and lose a point there because of the way the tool is set up. So there's a number of points in there that are obviously impacted from the building form and the structure, and we'll touch on those in a sec. So Green Star has transformed itself recently, so for those of you who aren't aware, that the suite of tools has now been reduced basically down to 4 tools. So there's the Green Star Communities, the Design and As-Built tool, Green Star Interiors, and Green Star Performance. So these replace what are now referred to as legacy tools, which are all the old tools that everyone would have been aware of, you know, like the old Office Design, Office As-Built, the education tool, a healthcare tool, an industrial tool, a multi-residential tool, public buildings and retail centres. So all those tools are now defunct and basically replaced by the Green Star Design and As-Built tool. So the one tool is now applied to everything from an Australian context. So Green Star applies to everything. So the lovely tool, as you can see on the list on the side, so they've replaced the tools, and rather than identify all the different market sectors, basically anything can be rated. So, and from laboratories, you know, sporting venues, police stations, anything you can think of. So the Green Star has tried to now encapsulate everything. So it's not too bad to read. So it still follows the same principles. So anyone who's been involved with the Green Star project, there were management, indoor environment quality, air, transport, water, materials, land use, emissions and innovation. The main ones obviously affecting civil, structural, and the mass of the building relate to the materials, which look at the life cycle impacts, you know, responsible building materials, sustainable products, construction and demolition waste, things that can be managed, and there's, you know, smarter ways to do, and using new materials. So the innovation of, you know, timber is still relatively innovative, so there'd be ways to get points in Green Star for that. So things that are impacted, obviously energy. So energy is a big one, but the way the tool, greenhouse gas emission reduction. So facade performance is the obvious one. So making sure the building is orientated in the right direction, that the glazing, the thermal properties of the building are optimised for the site, which is always a challenge when you have the view going to the west and everyone wants to open up to watch the western view and the setting sun, you know. So it's all good fun. Then obviously the materials, so life cycle impacts, responsible building materials, sustainable products, and the demolition waste we've already spoken about. And then emissions from the site, so reducing stuff leaving the site, so stormwater, sewer, so how they can be treated and what can be done. So just a little bit, so life cycle impacts, so I'll speed through these, but the joys are, they've given different methods now. So Green Star, like BCA and a lot of other, the National Construction Code, give you a prescriptive method, and you can now do like a comparative or a performance pathway, modelled pathway. So all these tools have got very many different ways of approaching a similar thing. So it's unfortunate that they're not all slightly more aligned, but Green Star is what it is for us, and it has certainly the market share. So yes, model and prescriptive. So other things, you know, obviously the easiest one, concrete's still in there, so, you know, water, aggregates, cement, mass reduction of steel, you know, reduced use of reinforcement steel, you know, recycled content, all those things are still in here, and they all help and they all contribute to a more sustainable building industry. Yeah, responsible building materials. So there are new bits in the Green Star to pick up, you know, percentage of structural tools supplied from accredited sustainable charters, you know, the certified timber. All these different systems are out there, so it's just being aware of all these things. So if you do get asked, because you will get asked at some point, you know where these questions or things at least to be aware of, to go looking, because there are people out there who can do all this, and there are suppliers and manufacturers who are adapting. You may pay a premium, but things are available. Sustainable products, so, you know, recycled content, all simple things, but, you know, they're now caught up in the tool. And then, you know, good ones about demolition construction waste, and, you know, how buildings can be pulled apart at the end of their design life rather than just being bulldozed. So all different ways of approaching things. Neighbours. Neighbours is, as I've said, it's the old ABGR. So years ago it was the Australian Building Greenhouse Rating System. So that was giving stars to a building. It got rebadged to the National Australia Built Environment Rating System, Neighbours, and started in offices as an energy rating tool. So where it's now also expanded through, and it does energy, water, and for offices it looks at waste and indoor environment now. So this tool is actually being legislated, and we'll come to that in a sec. So the energy component of this, it's measuring actual building performance. So this is a more building services related item, but this is about what energy a building uses, and it gets normalised based on occupancy and area and hours of operation and all sorts of other lovely black box things to spit out a number at the end. So 1 star being bad and 6 stars being good. So the scale on this was extended, so it started as a 5-star system, and too many buildings were getting 5 stars, so it had to be extended. And now if you go to the website, there's lots of buildings getting 6 stars, so it'll probably get extended again to 7 stars. So it's just a moving scale, which is good, because it's showing that with a little bit of management and applying current technologies, it's not difficult to get a well-performing building. And it probably shows, because the stars were actually originally set based on surveys of lots of buildings around lots of cities. So every city had buildings surveyed, and there was benchmarks set, and basically a good performer was the middle of the range, like the 2 to 3 was like what the best buildings were performing at the time. And within a few years of the tool being in, people were able to tune their buildings and just run them better because energy was cheap. We didn't care. So we got performance was picked up. Neighbours now also do waste, indoor environment, water, so like all these tools. But this is actual measuring existing buildings, so it measures the waste flow out of the buildings. It's measuring the water coming in, and measuring the air and the air quality within the space. So it's all about existing buildings. And where Neighbours has now gone on the bandwagon is that as part of the Commercial Building Disclosure Program. So the Building Energy Efficiency Disclosure Act of 2010 now mandates that anyone who's got a space of over 2,000 square metres that they're trying to lease or sell must have a Neighbours rating and must do a BEAC, what's called a Building Energy Efficiency certificate, which also has to include a lighting assessment. So it's like the stars on your fridge, it's all stars on washing machine or any of that. It's like, so any tenant coming to a building can ask for the bit of paper and you can assess your tenancy. So if you've got building A, 1 star, building B, 5 star, and they're the same rent, the idea is that it's going to drive market. So where this is starting to bite is obviously like B, C and D grade building stock is starting to feel the pinch as people are looking to re-life older buildings, and as a result driving the market in essence, so that there's buildings that are becoming redundant. So part of that is also going to be, and we're seeing that too, the repurposing of old buildings. So part of this is the recycling, so office to residential, office to student accommodation, office to hotel. And they're all examples of things that have happened in Brisbane. So green's not going to go away. So green buildings continue to double every 3 years. So we're going to see more and more, and so with the legislation and climate change and all the things that are driving us, you're going to see more of it, and it's got to become a way of life. So what we've got to look at is how we embrace it and how we can move forward and make sure that we do try to get back to our one planet of ability, just to be sustainable. A new star rating, which many of you may not have come across yet, is a thing called the WELL Building Standard. So this is another standard, but this is actually approaching, I suppose, sustainability from a completely sort of left field approach. So in Australia, Green Star are the administrators of this tool. It's been developed in the US by the International World Building Institute, and basically it's looking at well-being of people. So what it looks at is any building type again. What it is looking at is it was put together by scientists and doctors and researchers, and it's been done around body systems. So about the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, the light, all those actual science-related physical reactions were measured and worked out the best way to address. So when we think of buildings, we always get caught up in the initial costs, and then the next one is always the running costs. Not much goes into the thought about the people who are actually in the buildings and the people who are using the buildings. So when you look at the impacts to business, so ill health and absenteeism, $7 billion, 70% of societal healthcare problems are related to stress. The 26 billion in the US from presenteeism, yeah, it's great. But the cost from sickness and stress is enormous. So when you look at the costs over the life of a building, staff costs far outweigh any of the other costs. So a small improvement in staff costs improves the efficiency of the building. So it's a very different way of looking at how you treat buildings and what a sustainable building might be. So as you can see, so the percentage is the coloured dots. So the energy costs are tiny. So when you get into the actual operating of it, the energy is almost nothing, and we've got lots of legislation and stuff around that. Rental costs driven by market and supply and demand, but again, a small cost, and then it's the actual people costs that's the main cost. So as I was saying, from a commercial tenant, you get better productivity, decreased absenteeism. And, you can attract more people. So, many of you would have heard of Google, but Google do a lot of very different things in their space to attract talent. So it's just applying the same principles. So from a landlord's point of view, adapting these sort of approaches, you're attracting tenants, you're securing long-term leases, and you're increasing the value of the asset. So again, rates everything. And they use the silver, gold, platinum, or the North American type rating. So you'll see more about these things. So the triangle with all the bits and pieces, but basically what they come down to is like air. So it looks at treatment of air. So filtration, indoor pollutants, making sure that you've got healthy air to breathe. Some of them, it's all very straightforward the way they've approached this. Water, it's about filtering water, making sure you've got easy access to drinking water. Very simple things that can be measured and that you test and monitor water supplies. Waste, water's cracked up there. Oops, do the next one. Nourishment. So, avoiding sugar drinks. So the Coke machine, you lose points if you've got a Coke machine with this tool. So there you go. So it's just different ways of looking at things. Fruit vending machines, you get a point. Light, looking at circadian rhythms. So this is one thing that we're seeing. So with LED lighting now being affordable, is actually programming your LED lighting to cycle through the day. So a lot of these things are now very easy to apply, and are just a different way of approaching things. Fitness, making places where people can exercise, and end of trip facilities. So nothing, just trying to make people more active. Comfort, so environmental, the temperature, the space that they're working in. So many of the Green Star things. So there's overlaps with all these, and Green Star over the next few years are going to align a lot of their indoor environment quality with these tools, and so it becomes more of a one system. Mind, how to minimise stress. So providing things like childcare centres within the facility, so that you're not worried about child drop-offs. A whole pile of different things, but it's all relatively straightforward. And just some local examples to finish with. So things, most of the new office buildings in Brisbane have been built with a Green Star and a neighbours in mind. So, just the pretty building pictures. So at least I've got some building photos where, like Brisbane Square. This was an interesting one. This is almost a repurpose. So this was a B-grade building that was brought back to being A-grade quality. So we actually did this a few years ago and won a PCA award for it. So it went from a 2-star energy monster to 5-star, and it's now having other upgrades done to it. But the relifing of buildings. So we're not demolishing and we're not throwing away. We're making buildings work harder. 480 Queen Street just finished, and innovative solution. So it's got a steel. It was the first steel frame, I think, since the SGIO building, or the old Suncorp Centre in King George Square. So it's about applying technologies. So, and with that one, thank you very much.